today. All right, we're going to get started. Please bow with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, for another day in your kingdom, we're eternally grateful for everything that you do for us corporately and individually. We say truly thanks. Lead, guide, and direct us. Keep your healing hand on us and all those who are down and low. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We're getting fuller as the day goes by, and if I can get my vice chairman in here, we'll start. Oh, there he is. Okay. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I come before you today asking for House Bill 760. This is one of the pieces of legislation that was developed by the Education Finance Study Commission. It was in Terry England's subgroup. They had two pieces, this one and this is the first of them. And this deals with capital outlay funds. And capital outlay, I'll go brief. If you want more, I'll give you more than you want, because Mr. Chairman's reminded me that brevity is appreciated. But what this basically does, the capital outlay funds were started in '77 and funded, first of all, in '81 to allow schools to draw down money from the state to build new buildings, renovation, and for capital improvement. In years later, in 1994, they came up with what they call the fast growth money. That was for systems that were experiencing tremendous growth. At that time, they submitted 5-year plans, and they were only updated every 5 years. So they were unable to have real-time data, so that's why they kept the fast-growing funds to build new buildings. Now with real-time data we have, and only having 18 systems this year even apply for it out of the 180, where we have had as many as 50, the first recommendation is we have 4 categories: exceptional growth, regular category, advanced funding, and low wealth. We're asking that the fast growth or the exceptional growth be rolled into the regular category. That's $100 million into the $200 million regular growth, so that they can use it now where they need it for renovations, for other improvements, and not just new schools. We're also in this bill, they're taking the low wealth school systems. They only had 3 years to pay back their money. We're extending that to 5 years because with the economy they need more time. And we also have here the advanced funding formula. We're asking that be kept in there, because that allows these systems that are having a hard time raising their share of the money a little extra time, and allows them to get their money earlier and gives them longer to pay back. It also allows in the advanced funding, where we had the first time in this state last couple of years, schools destroyed by tornadoes, they couldn't get the money to rebuild their schools. This allows us to let them have the money up front and to go ahead and build their schools and pay it back later. Mr. Chairman, I can go into all the detail you want, but that's basically what it does.
You were right the first time. Brevity means a lot. Mr. Willard, your buttons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask one question dealing with the issue about this destruction of property by tornadoes or fire or otherwise. Does the state require local boards to maintain fire and extended coverage on these properties?
Yes, sir, they have it. But many times in dealing with all that, it takes so long, so we just want to go ahead and give them the money up front, and when they collect the money, they can pay it back. Yes, sir.
All right.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring to you House Bill 725. It's a bill that addresses a potential loophole in the qualifying process throughout the state. It simply says that in nonpartisan as well as partisan elections, if in an incumbent's race, must be an incumbent race, that if the incumbent qualifies and then withdraws prior to the end of qualifying, then there will be an immediate 2-day additional qualifying after that time period. It also says that if a person qualifies in a partisan race and then withdraws after qualifying but before the primary, then it treats it as a death, the same in the death clause, and there would be a minimum of 1 day and a maximum of 3 days additional qualifying. And this bill simply addresses the potential for someone to game the system and bring their friends in at the last day, and we want to eliminate that loophole. And I'd be happy to answer any questions and appreciate your favorable consideration.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Burns. Wait a second, who got one? You got one? Judy, Mr. Hamilton, would you come back 1 second, please? You did have a question. She was just not very quick on the
Yes.
call.
Took me a minute to think about it. Mr. Hamilton, do you know how much it will cost the cities or the counties to do this extended qualifying?
No, all I'd know it would be, in the first case, it would be 2 additional days. It's the immediate following Monday and Tuesday. In the case of if it's after qualifying, it would be anywhere from 1 to 3 days. This bill has received completely nonpartisan. We've got both people in the aisle that have signed the bill that passed out of committee unanimously, and we had both ACCG, GMA, as well as the Secretary of State's office represented in both the subcommittee and the committee and meeting, and that issue never came up.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Burns.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I bring to you House Bill 594 for your consideration. And I will tell you up front, this bill has been thoroughly vetted by the Chairman Willard's committee, and the language is somewhat not very clear, but the purpose behind this bill is very clear.
Are you going to take as long as Mr. Willard?
No, sir. First, I'd like to tell you I was chosen to represent this bill because I have a lot of experience with non-profit businesses, low-profit businesses, my own. So,
Mr. Willard, how would you like? How did that get by us?
You already done that, Mr. Chairman, at least once. Chairman and members, this bill basically is a hybrid organization that allows the benefits of a nonprofit business corporation to be blended in with a for-profit business, an LLC, and when its primary purpose is to implement for a non-profit venture for a legitimate public purpose. And then it allows that to blend into and take down some of the benefits that accrue to nonprofits, but it allows them to be treated as a for-profit business and pay taxes, if in fact it does migrate on into a for-profit business. It is a jobs bill. Other states around us have implemented this legislation, and they're able to attract this type of businesses, these startups. It allows the foundations to put in money and also the private side to put in money to fund these different organizations. Representative Abrams is very familiar with this type business. It was what she practiced with in her private practice. It has a legitimate public purpose, and I think it's something that could be beneficial to us here in Georgia. And it would be policed by the federal tax code, by the IRS, and that's why the language is somewhat arbitrary in that, because we had to follow the language from the tax code, federal tax code, to make it workable for us. Mr. Chairman, that's about it.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, I just had a couple questions. Could you give me 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe an exhaustive list, if you can, of what things for what functions these companies perform as a nonprofit and for what functions they perform as a for-profit? I mean,
I can.
Property taxes, donations, kind of walk us through that list of things if you could.
Let me tell you one of the primary uses. We have a group here in Atlanta that was required to incorporate in Michigan. The young man that headed the company up developed a product that's used in the cold chain to keep products cold. It's primarily used with the Center of Disease Controls here as you take vaccines to third world countries where the integrity of the temperature has to be maintained. He developed a product that's able to do that. Now, that product also has implications in the nonprofit world, in the public benefit world, as we take vaccines to third world countries, as we bring samples back to Atlanta to have them tested. Now, it also has benefits if we have something that's able to keep products cold for an extended period of time. There would also be benefits of that product in the for-profit world. So they have a legitimate public purpose of say, public health. And then on the profit side of the equation, they're able to leverage Gates Foundation's money. They're able to use that money and leverage it with private monies, and that's why the for-profit side comes in, because those monies have to be paid back. And the overwhelming purpose has to be for a legitimate public benefit. Now, and as to the rest of your question, now, as you know, a nonprofit 501 corporation pays no property taxes, pays no sales taxes. Now, a L3C would pay taxes up front on its sales taxes and property taxes on what assets it does have.
So these entities pay full property taxes?
Yes, sir.
They pay sales taxes as any other would. Do donations to these for-profit companies, are they tax deductible donations?
Yes, sir. Now, straight to the LC3, no, they are not.
One last question: is there some profit limitation on their margins, or can they have whatever margin they want?
There's no limitation. It has to be for a legitimate public purpose. Now, the policing, if I may say, as to how if it is for a public purpose, the overriding purpose of this corporation is for a public purpose, is really policed through the IRS. And because the foundations, if their grants or their loans that go into these type corporations do not fit a legitimate public purpose as its priority number one goal, then their status as a nonprofit can be challenged by IRS.
And Mr. Chairman,
by the IRS.
To my dear friend, in Cobb County, we've got a great company, Lockheed Martin, that's been a tax-paying member that's employed 8,000 people for years in Marietta. They're a for-profit company. I would submit to you that their fighter aircraft and their airlift aircraft perform a significant and meaningful public purpose, but I don't know that gives them nonprofit status. I'm just trying to understand why the nonprofit status is essential. The private marketplace can't deliver these same kinds of products.
I'm going to stop it right there. Mr. Willard, would you like to add something to this?
I think I can give a simplified explanation if it might help, Mr. Chairman. He mentioned Gates Foundation. This is primarily a tool used by foundations where they are able to take part of their grant money, which means the income money they have or the growth off their assets, and make a grant to a startup type company and have that company, it will still be a normal type of expense of that company, of the foundation. Now, if the money received by this startup company is successful and they have a good return, and the money now is coming back to pay off the foundation as a loan. These are people that cannot get loans otherwise. So it comes back to the foundation as income from that loan. It then has to be used by the foundation again for charitable purposes. It cannot go back into their capital fund. And the purpose of it is to have another source of funding potential companies that have a good idea, a good product, where they're not able to get loans from a recognized financial lending institution. That's how they're used. Is that correct, Mr.?
That is correct. And it also allows that primary position will be taken usually by the foundation as it injects money into the proposition. You're able to attract private money, and instead of the foundation that would normally have taken a first lien position, the later contributed money can take a first, so it makes it easier to attract private money into a venture like this so that you can hold your interest rates down and hopefully the business can be profitable.
Mr. Pete. Mr. Rice.
Chairman, You probably have addressed it someplace. Maybe it's in the federal code, but the definition of low profit, it seems like a kind of an amorphous term. I was just wondering where that's defined more clearly.
Comes straight out of the code.
Out of the federal code?
Yes, sir. And we talked about maybe changing some language in it, but this is the language that's used in other states, and how its primary purpose is to facilitate foundations to inject money into these type propositions. And to do that, they are strictly bound by this language and how it applies to them, and some of the hoops they have to jump through to make sure they can be active in this kind of investment.
Mr. Chanel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Bruns, I'm like you alluded to. I've started several companies, and a bunch of them been low profit. How in the world do you define what low profit is?
It has to have an overwhelming public purpose, is where that term comes from. Some benefit as creation of jobs, or as some benefit to mankind to facilitate that definition.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Burns, is it not true that the term low profit refers to often the sale of goods, not for a high margin, but for a nominal margin, to allow the company to sell those goods and generate adequate revenue to continue the company, but without the intent of becoming a behemoth like a Lockheed Martin? So, for example, there are companies that are low profit companies that sell shoes, but that instead of trying to sell shoes at a high margin, say they make $10 off of each shoe, they only intend to make $1 because the public purpose is to provide shoes to low-income communities that otherwise could not afford them. And to Mr. Willard's point, under the federal income tax code, for foundations to contribute to those companies, they can't do it as donations because they're not nonprofit entities, but they can do it as programmatic investments. And because the program is of public purpose, and because the profit is intended to only be sufficient to generate the business and not to enrich the owners, this provides for the opportunity for foundations and for other investors to support a public purpose without necessarily having to rely on and draw down federal dollars or draw down donations from other entities, but instead to become self-sufficient, sustaining companies that serve a public purpose but use the private marketplace in order to accomplish it.
You're certainly correct. One last point, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one last point. Mr. Chairman Chanel, North Carolina is using this in the furniture industry. That's been really hurt very badly because of businesses moving offshore, where they're come in and use this type of investments to revitalize the furniture industry and attract back those jobs. I can see it working in Georgia in the cutting sew industry that has gone offshore. It's a way to attract investments that have a very low interest rate, so that those businesses could be barely profitable and bring jobs back to Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Was it short enough, Mr. Chairman?
Please don't come back. And to show our great respect for the house across the way, Mr. Tippins. Everybody's a Mr. or a Ms. here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate your consideration today of Senate Bill 231. This bill deals with amending very slightly Code Section 42860, which relates to first offender treatment for certain crimes involving law enforcement officers. 42860 already lists 5 categories of crimes for which offenders, upon adjudication of guilt or plea, are precluded from having first offender status. This adds another class, and it has to do with the violence on law enforcement officers, basically aggravated assault, aggravated battery or obstruction of justice, resulting in serious physical harm or injury to the officer. I think this makes a strong statement to the public safety community and hopefully would serve as a deterrent to those who would choose to have either aggravated assault or battery on our officers. This bill has been changed just a little bit from last year. It was much too narrow. I think it had simple battery, simple assault. I don't think that bar was high enough. That's been changed. I thank you so much for your consideration of the bill.
Are there any questions for the senator? Y'all treat him too nice. All right, let's go. Mr. Brockway.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bring before you House Resolution 1151. Very simply, it would create a study committee to look at our system of care in Georgia for victims of human trafficking. We know the budget is tight, so we're not asking for any money for this. We're asking the members of the activist community are very willing to volunteer their time, and we would ask that representatives and senators who are appointed to this do the same thing. That's really it. I'd hope that you'll give favorable consideration of that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from Mr. Brockway? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Dickinson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the committee. This bill, House Bill 681, the problem is restaurants and food vendors who participate in nonprofit events, such as food tastings, are required to pay a fee and complete a 28-page application. What this bill does is the issue is it adds unnecessary regulations to charities working with licensed and permitted restaurants. It duplicates existing requirements that does not enhance the safety for Georgians. This bill removes these requirements and allows for one-day tasting events to nonprofits. This bill passed out of committee with the support of the Department of Public Health, and I ask for your favorable consideration.
Are there questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring today House Bill 824. This revises the way we calculate equalization grants. This also, like Chairman Coleman said, came out of the work of the Education Finance Study Commission this past summer under the leadership of Terry England and Christine Murdoch in the Budget Office. Basically, the problem is the formula we use to calculate equalization grants is broken. You have QBE, which is your regular funding for students, which is the same across the state. Equalization is a grant program designed to give the low wealth systems who have less property tax per child, give them extra money, because in some of these rural districts especially, they do not have the property tax that they can use to generate revenues for schools like many of the other counties have. So that's the purpose of equalization. For fiscal year 13, the formula that's on the books right now calculates $830 million of grant, but the appropriation is only $436. So we're only in the position we can only fund 50% of what the formula is doing, and the formula is broken. It's also broken in the second way. The formula now is sending a lot of money to the higher wealth systems and not to the lower wealth systems. So again, this has been looked at for months and months, and the recommendation is to change it. Instead of going to the top 75th percent and equalizing to there, we equalize to the statewide average, and that is what we're looking to do. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you House Bill 687, committee substitute. What this bill does is provides mandates that 2 calls be placed to alarm users to a monitoring center to confirm site activity in the event of an alarm being triggered. The Georgia Association of Chiefs estimates that 80+% of alarms at residences and businesses are false, resulting in a lot of down officer time. Basically, this mandates a second number being collected by the alarm companies, and that second call being made prior to dispatching an officer. The exceptions to this would be a fire call, which you're going to dispatch immediately, a medical emergency call, or a duress like a panic button. This is supported by the Georgia Association of Chiefs, the alarm industry, as well as the state fire marshal. I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you. Ms. Morgan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 707, which is under modified structured rule. And this has to do with students who attend private colleges in our state being able to use their photo ID to vote. Currently, students who attend public universities can use their ID, but for some reason, we kind of left out the private college students. So we worked directly with the Secretary of State's office to narrow this group of colleges to those that accept HOPE scholarships or HOPE funding. And so I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before the committee HB 711. This bill creates an exception to the interspousal witness privilege in the case of domestic violence so as to assist in prosecuting such cases. It also creates a limited privilege in the case of communication between a domestic violence victim and a shelter so as to encourage victims to seek help. This is a bill that we worked on with the Georgia Family Violence Commission, the prosecutors, and representatives from the shelter.
Any questions of Mr. Lindsay? Okay. All right. We're going to set, this is setting the calendar for tomorrow. All right, do I hear a motion on HR 1151? Any opposed? All right, that zone is modified open. Hear a motion on HB 711?
Move.
Any opposed? It'll be under modified open. HB 760. Do I hear a motion? Any opposition? It'll be under modified structure. HB 725. Any opposition? It'll be modified structure. HB 642. Do I hear a move? Any opposition? It'll be under structured. HB 805. Do I hear a move? Any opposition? It'll be under structured, and that'll be tomorrow's calendar. Thank you for coming.